Hey, everybody. First of all, Merry Christmas. So glad you joined us. Always running a little late because I got to catch up on the NEA with Father, the news of what's going on in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm so glad that you could join us, that he could join us. This will be our Christmas/New Year's Eve get together. And Father's had a series of sermons called Living Christmas. Have I got that right, Father?
Yep.
And it was a series of 3, and I picked pieces of each one that I just loved. So I'm going to kind of intermingle some of them. But first of all, I want to welcome Father Lowe from Jacksonville, Florida. Those that haven't joined us before, Father Lowe is a wonderful priest down in Jacksonville, St. John the Divine in Florida. But he also represents, to a certain extent, for somebody like myself, and definitely for people older than me, a kind of a generational change in priests that I've seen, which is I grew up when I grew up, Father, the sermons were in Greek. So I would, the whole time in church, I'd sit there and look at my mom and go, and what did he say? And what did he say? And so we've kind of evolved it. Then it went from Greek and English, and then it kind of, and eventually got to the point where if you go up on YouTube and listen to his sermons, they're applicable to everybody, and they're just wonderful. So before we dive into the Christmas stuff, I want to welcome you, Father Lowe. Thank you for being here. I know you're swamped, and I can't wait to talk to you about Christmas, my favorite time of the year.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thanks to all of those who are tuning in and watching or downloading this video. It's an honor to be with all of you. You're way too kind, Bob, and you. I'm trying to keep my head the size of the box that's on the screen. So please do not add anything more to it. So anyway, thank you, brother. Though very nice.
Well, all right. So first of all, before I get into some of your sermons, I want to ask you just a generic overall question, which is this: the myth is that people get lonely at Christmas, and I know that's true for sure. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering, as a priest, do you see a difference in this time of year from the rest of the year, where people come to you more often, you see more depression, or is that just a myth?
No. I mean, for many, it's like that Christmas carol. It says it's the most wonderful time of the year. It is for some, but for some others, it's very difficult, especially if they've lost a loved one over the last year, or if they're going through a difficulty in their marriage, health concerns. Things get magnified a great deal at the holidays. So yes, you have this kind of like, I love this time of the year because there's just the lights, the caroling, the beauty that goes along with it. There's a level of joy, but there's also, for many, many people, I would argue that there is, depending on what they've been going through, or what they, or what they're experiencing in that moment, it could be for many people, it could be a very difficult time of the year. It could be I'm remembering Elvis Presley when he's saying, I'm having a blue Christmas. Right. That's, I think, for a lot of people. And yes, I do see an increased amount of people coming in that are struggling. Really? Yes, absolutely.
And you also mentioned something, I think it was in the first sermon, which was that the letdown after Christmas is substantial. Is that true too?
Yes. I mean, what we're seeing, there's several different studies that I talk about it. And just to kind of give everyone here a background of our sermon series, what we typically do is give sermons that are 3 to 4 weeks, generally around a central topic, and we cover it from different angles. And so this is on Living Christmas. And the whole premise, if you will, behind this sermon series, Bob, was that, studies are showing that, after Christmas, people, there's a heightened level of depression, sadness, because you go from this euphoric joy of receiving these gifts that people are oftentimes giving us at Christmas, to this major letdown. There's not really anything going on in January, at least secularly speaking. And that's why immediately after Christmas, you already see people starting to get the next thing, which is Valentine's Day, the next big event. So what happens is that there's this letdown, and really what we wanted to try to change this year was to pose this question to our church family, and that is that, what if this year was different? What if Christmas was not an event in our life, but an invitation to change our life? That Christmas would be what so many of us want it to be, something we do all year round. And that happens not because of something that happens externally. It's by a decision that we're making internally about what we're doing with this gift, the gift of Christ. I love how in the Bible says that we receive the most indescribable gift, and that is Jesus Christ, our Savior. And so, what would that look like if that became every single day that we experience that, not just simply a day in our life?
Yeah. So I thought this was a great way where you started it, which was, what is the newspaper of your life? And you touched on something that I really think is a bit of a plague in our society now, which is, yes, the internet and iPhones and all that stuff is great, but I think what it's done, and Twitter, is it's made the news so instantly accessible that we get addicted to finding out what just happened, what just happened, what just happened. And I think it becomes a vicious cycle that you struggle to get over. And one of the things you kind of glossed over, but when I heard it, I went, "Oh, it's not even close." Is you said, "What are you doing more? Are you reading the news more or reading the Bible more?" People seem so up to date, and I fall into the same trap where you read and read the news, and then when it comes time for the Bible, you're like, "Okay, let me get it." And it's you get so much more out of the Bible. There was something, Father. Oh, I wish I had it at my fingertips now, but it showed. I'm going to have this. I'm going to send this to you. That when you start reading the Bible, it showed within, I think, a week, the loneliness goes away by 15%. Within 2 weeks of Bible, and it progresses, and it shows that as you read it, the loneliness goes away, the love comes in, and it to me gives you so much more than the news. So tell us what you meant by the newspaper of your life.
So what I shared with what I think is so important is that, when we, as a priest, you write sermons every single week, and we were talking about this offline just before we got on the air. For me, when I was at the seminary, they used to tell us that when you write a sermon, you should have the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. And I was saying basically that that if we were looking at the stories that are in the newspaper now, we're continuously seeing this horrific tragedy taking place in Gaza and in Israel. We're seeing the continued war going on in the Ukraine. We're seeing on a national level, we see this continually bickering between the Republicans, Democrats, who's going to be the next president, whatever, all this other stuff. And then my argument was that's what's going on outside the world, but all of us have breaking news stories that are happening in our own personal life. And those breaking news stories can be, you're worried about a child academically, or you're worried about a child who they're hanging around. For some of you, maybe financially, you're worried about how you're going to pay for the gifts, or even purchasing gifts at Christmas. Maybe for some of you, as you're hearing my voice today, you've got problems in your marriage, and that's a breaking news story. And the question I was posing to our church family was what's the newspaper articles of your life? What is the breaking news story right now happening in your life? Because for many of us, we know what's going on in the world, and we can know what's going on in our own life. The problem is that we have not brought the other part of this, the part of the Bible, or the part of what I would say the church, into every situation in our life, so that we compartmentalize Christ, Bob. Sometimes we kind of put God in this little box, and we just kind of say, whenever I need him, I'll open the box, I'll unwrap it, I'll use this. And my argument would be is that I think that for many of us, we need to A, know what the newspaper story is in our life, but B, and more important than that, is knowing that we need to have the author, if you will, the author of our life, Christ, part of that, to give us the means to get through that.
And what you brought up, there's a series of notes you had here, but that the enemy loves when you're afraid. And I thought it was so great because you also then added something else, which fear is contagious. And you followed that up, and you can address these three, but this next comment to me was so spot on, is fear stops you from hearing God speak to you. And to me, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, I was taking, when I was beginning dance classes years ago, and there was a great dancer. This guy was Eddie Garcia, danced with Michael Jackson. He was just a great person. And I'm in the back, and I sucked. And so I just stayed out of everyone's way. And when you're on the ground, it's called second position. You have your legs out. So you're constant, all the dancers just put their legs on, boom, they're all flexible. And I'm stuck there. And he came over and he was watching me, and he hit my thigh. And my thigh was, my thighs were like this. He goes, "You'll never get the stretch if you're that tense."
Mm.
You have to let all that go. And then you'll say, but you're gripping so hard with both your thighs, you're never going to. And I'm thinking, wait, isn't it my back? And he said, no, it's here. You got to let all that tension go.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought what you wrote here was just, or what you said, excuse me, was so great. Do you want to address those three thoughts about the enemy and so forth?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so one of the things that in order for us to kind of give the response of how do we deal with fear and worry, because fear on its surface is not necessarily bad, but mismanaged fear can be very bad. So in order for us to know like how to deal with it or how to address it, let's just kind of share with our audience like how it impacts us. So number one is, as you mentioned, fear is contagious. So in other words, once you have one fear, it actually breeds onto other fears. In fact, they call this in psychology catastrophizing. In other words, where you start taking one fear and then it starts building, so that all that you start looking at is things that you're afraid of. So let's just use an example of what we're seeing in the world today. Maybe some people will say, "Oh my gosh, is this the second coming? Is the world coming to an end? We see all this horror, all this going on around the world." You notice how the fear is continuing. We don't know if it's the end of the world or not, but we start already buying into this idea or feeding this emotion of fear. Then not only is it contagious, but it also and let me just back up. Not only does fear build on itself, it also causes other people who are around us to become fearful.
Right.
And I say this respectfully towards those that may be in the news industry. I think we all need to know what's going on in the world. I get that. And as you beautifully said, Bob, I think for a lot of people, news is so accessible that we spend so much time with that. And that was watching the news. The problem with this is that in order for them to continue to do what they're doing, they have to kind of give us sometimes a sense of fear. Like everything is a breaking news story. I mean, how often, I remember when we were growing up, a breaking news story would be like once every, twice a year. Now it's everything. It's a breaking news story. It's this perpetual level of fear that's happening. And it's because it's contagious and it allows other people to be afraid. And then the way that it impacts us so much is that fear has a voice. Fear occupies actually voices in our mind, so much so that when fear is operating, you cannot hear God's voice, because that voice will occupy or will speak louder than God's voice. And that's why it's so important that when you're experiencing levels of fear in your life, and again, fear is healthy. I mean, we don't want you not, fear tells you that if a bear is coming towards you, that you need to run away. Well, I don't know what it is. I think bear, you're supposed to lay down, and but whatever the animal is that you've heard of the fight or flight. I mean, there's a benefit in being afraid if you see something happening to run out of a burning fire that's happening in your home. But mismanaged fear, which what I mean by that is fear that simply stays within you, where there's not a moment of, okay, what am I going to do about this? Because if there's no comma to that fear, if you just simply put a period at the end of that fear, then you will die in that period. You will die in that fear. And that's what we see so much of. And then fear as a whole impacts other parts of our lives. It allows us to withdraw ourselves from each other. It cascades into other parts of our life where it impacts our purpose on this world.
Very true.
That's our ability to communicate in healthy relationships. I mean, this is serious how it impacts us, and for that reason, we gave a sermon about it. But positive fear is where I say I'm not going to stop at the period. I'm going to say, okay, comma, what am I going to do about it? And that's where I would say we bring in Christ into that. We bring in the church.
I adore my wife, and we've been married 30 years. But she can fear over the things. She can start a forest fire with fear. And I'll give you a small example. It's just way small, but it is charming. So we were in Italy. We were at some airport. I can't remember whatever we were. I can't. But it's a place where they make certain glass, and it's colorful glass. Okay. Well, it's not my thing, but okay. She was like, "Oh my gosh, we're in blah blah blah," and this is like the only place where they make, or this whatever. So we were in the airport, and because we were traveling, we had very small bags. It didn't have a lot of room. So the plane was getting ready to board, whatever, and she came up and she said to me, she goes, "Here's one of those glasses." And I looked and I said, "That's beautiful." And she goes, I'm thinking of getting. She goes, I really wanted like 6 or 7 to give away as gifts and so forth.
Mm.
And she said, we'll never have a chance. She goes, but I just think they're going to break. And I said, and she goes, so I said, Trisha, go buy them. She goes, but what if they break? I go, it'll be a great story. We bought them. They broke. How did they break? We don't know. They broke. I go, but, and I'm telling you, she was off. She was, and the thing was, I videotaped her going, because she was bam, 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 bam. Got the glasses. They put it in a thing, and it was so great to see her. I didn't care what happened to the glasses. But here's the funny part. So she gets them, and she goes, I have time to go to the bathroom. I go, okay, I'll wait out here, and then we'll go to the gate. So we're waiting. She came out. She looked like she's seen a ghost. She said, Bob, I put it down. And she goes, as I walked away, the bag went, and she said, it may have all broken. And I said, Trish, I looked at her, I said, I claim in the name of God, it did not break, but we got to get to the gate. So I said, if we get home, it'll be a great story. God opened it up, and there the glasses were. They were all good, safe and sound. And they're
Oh, good.
I would say in our relationship and in our lives, I would say 80% of the time, I've been able to break through with her with things that I could see would multiply fear quickly for her. And so, but that was a small example. But I want to go to, I just want to show it one more time because I just think it's so critical. Because one of the things I've heard you say in these sermons and in so many of your sermons is, I think it was in Proverbs, you mentioned Solomon in one of them, that it's the mind. It's that's where the battle's being fought here. And, people, first of all, don't want to acknowledge the devil or whatever, or powers and principalities, whatever you want to call it. But it's the mind where the battle's being fought. And the devil will get into the mind and stop you through that fear. And that can cripple people. And I think what you said just now, from the purpose of their life, that to me is where the real damage is done, is from the purpose.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder how many people, and I mean this totally respectfully, but how many people go to their grave having dreams that God placed on their heart, but they never work towards it because of fear. I mean, that's the thing. And so again, I don't want us to be afraid of fear, because I think that fear is helpful. However, if it does not produce an action, a healthy action with it, then we will die in that period. We will just simply die in the fear itself. And that the fear itself, at the end of the day, you have to be very careful, because the Bible says that we cannot worship two masters. So when you start putting more time, your mental time, your spiritual time, into the fear, then you elevate fear over, and then you elevate fear over your faith. And there's, then you start asking yourself, okay, that's when it becomes a spiritual battle that if you're not aware of, you feed it. I'll tell people, whatever you feed thrives, and whatever you starve dies.
Right,
so if you feed the fear, it is going to grow. And then the statement that we made here, I always give like a takeaway, statement, in every one of the sermons. And I said that we need to make fear walk and make our faith go to work. That's what it is.
Yeah, I think there was a book I read on Martin Luther King, and I don't know if he said it or it was in the book, but it said, fear knocked on the door, faith answered the door, fear had run away. I love that. And I always thought about that. And for those of you that have seen Do You Want to Dance? There's a scene on the rooftop where the character I play talks to a girl and asks her, why didn't you ever continue with sculpting? And it talks about all these things about really seizing what you believe God put you here for. And it came from a very strange moment in my life, simple moment, I should say. I was talking to my uncle, who was a lawyer, who since he's passed away. And one day I asked him, are you happy you're a lawyer? And he said, I am. He goes, but you know what I really wanted to be? And I never knew this. He goes, I wish I would have been a maitre d' at a great restaurant. And I remember hearing that. I thought, oh God, why didn't you do it? Like, he wasn't saying I want to be an astronaut or something that you were like, well, okay, and so I think when I heard that, that's when I said to myself, I just don't want to be what you just said, which is when I go to the grave, whenever it is, I've filled the bucket list, so to speak. I've done everything that I thought God put me here to do. So there is one, and these are the back to backs. This one is and you reiterated it twice, and I thought it was so beautiful. Peace is not the absence of fear; it's the presence of God in your life.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, tell us how you get there, because that's the question, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's so again, like we were talking about, is okay. So if we recognize that that peace is not the absence of fear, so that fear is going to be there. It's okay. How do I insert God into this? Because the mind will naturally gravitate towards the negative. That's how it always works. In fact, there's more space in our brains to store negative memories than there are
Really?
positive memories. So we've kind of gotten all that, and that's
Yeah.
why, as you were mentioning earlier, when Solomon in the book of Proverbs says, "Above everything else, guard your mind, for everything flows from it." Because of that, the first thing that we have to do is recognize that, where is God in my fear? In other words, how am I going to insert God? And I use this analogy a lot, even when I do retreats, and also is prayer. And we talk about prayer a lot in the church, but we oftentimes mistake what prayer is, and I mean that respectfully. I think sometimes we have this idea that I need to give God a litany of all the things that I'm needing Him to do, as if God does not know what we need Him to do. So prayer. And that's fine. If that helps you, that's great. But it's probably more therapeutic for you than information for God, just so you know. But with that being, with that being said, what I would say is, prayer is the moment where, if you imagine everything that you're dealing with right now, if you were to hold on to all that, okay, all those fears, all those worries that you are, prayer is you going like this.
Sure.
Is giving them is open hands. And what we need to start doing is having a lot less closed fist to God and a lot more open arms. Like, God, I'm handing this to you. I love one of my favorite Bible verses that helped me when my dad was so sick, that I used it really in that particular season of my life, was when the Bible says, "Cast all your anxieties on God." And I love this. And it says, comma, "because He cares." Like, not cast some of them. Like, everything that you have on your heart right now, whatever it is, your children, your health, yourself, maybe you're facing death. I don't know, whatever it is that you're going through. Casting, in the Greek way that they say that casting means literally handing, like as if you're handing a bag full of groceries off to someone. That's what you're simply saying. God, I'm handing this off to you. Whatever is your will, whatever you wish to have happen, I'm simply going to give that to you. That's where our faith comes in, because if we're trying to only give one bag to God, then we're saying that, God, I don't think I can, I don't think you can handle this. No, it's saying, hey, God, I'm giving you this, and whatever is your will, because I know I'm on a win. I know at the end of the day, and Bob, you know this already, but we're on the winning team. Like, we know how the story ends, everyone. It's not like we're ambiguous. There's no massive war that's going to happen between God and the devil, and we're stuck in the middle, and whoever wins, God's already done all that. We know how it's going to end. The question is making sure that we live that victory now. So whatever it is, if we die, is to gain. If we live here, we have time to continue to draw closer to Him.
I think I can't remember you reminded me of I believe there's a phrase in the Bible that says, "I know what you need before you even come to me."
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one that I love, it's kind of tied in with this. He says, "Take my yoke upon you, because my yoke is gentle." And it's just so, it's like, I give it to me, and I'll handle it. And I'll tell you this, I don't know if I'm a type A person. I think at times I am, and other times I'm not. But I know that when our boys are turning 25 tomorrow, they're 20, all our triplets.
Oh, well, give them all my best wishes.
I will. I think what God does for people like myself that have always, if trouble came, I try and figure out a way that I could work longer or study harder, and I think that God, as I told the audience and you before, they wanted us to abort two of the boys because Trisha was tiny. They didn't think she'd carry it. And he said to us at one point, and he was a good man. He just said, "I'm not worried about the boys dying. What I'm worried about is you're going to have 3 invalids, and your lives are going to change forever." He actually said, "You're going to most likely get divorced." And my wife is a therapist, and she said he's just speaking. I counsel a lot of people like that.
Mm.
But what God showed me in that moment was when He's really trying to grow you, not beat you up, but grow you. What He does is He eliminates you. You cannot hand off the problem to anyone. You can't just give part of it to this person and part of it to God. There was no one else that we could ask for help in that moment. There was only one thing, which was faith. That everyone looked and we didn't know if they could make it to 12 weeks, 15 weeks, 18 weeks. And it was just, and what God, when you say, as we did, and it came to a moment when they wanted us to abort the kids, we in the end said, and I don't say this, believe me, we were scared beyond belief. We said, we'll take whatever God gives us, and I think I mentioned this to you last time. There was a priest, Father Chris, who said, we were at a presidential rally years before, and we were talking about this issue. He said, I won't vote for this person because he's so against, he's so pro-abortion. And I said, well, tell me what your thoughts are as a priest and so forth. I was very young at the time. And I said, well, what would happen to you if it happened to you? And he said, whatever that child was, Marie and I would have it because our marriage could handle it. So the power of the priest saying that to me, and then God turning everything over to God and saying, I can't do anything more to help you.
Right.
This is the issue. And once you do that and you see how God delivers, it develops that muscle in you to go as the problems come, and they keep coming. They keep coming in life to go. As I say before I go to sleep on many, many nights, can you take the night shift, God? I'm tired. And then I get up in the morning and go, and would you mind taking the day shift?
I love that.
So I want to address something. I didn't know what it was. I'm embarrassed to say, but if you can elaborate on it, what are the prison epistles? I didn't know what that was.
So as many of us, I think when we read the Bible, we sometimes kind of look at it as a chronological order. And there are parts of it, obviously, that are chronological. But in the New Testament, you obviously have the four gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You have the book of Acts. But then you start going into books that are based upon themes. And these are called the prison epistles. These are 4 books written when Paul is in prison in Rome. And these books, they include the book of Philemon, the book of Philippians, the book of Colossians, the book of Ephesians. These 4 books. And they're such powerful books. In fact, I would encourage, one of the things I'm doing right now, and I'm not saying for you to be like me at all, the listeners, but I'm reading the prison epistles specifically during this Advent season. Because obviously we're doing a lot of sermons that relate to this. And for those of you that are Orthodox Christians, what you should know is that in the month of December, almost every single epistle reading that is done is taken from the prison epistles. So it's important to kind of know that even in the calendar, the ecclesiastical calendar within the Orthodox Church, that they too follow certain themes at times. And we're in one of those where we're reading a lot from the prison epistles. So those are the books that Paul wrote. We hear about that in the book of Acts, I think chapter 28, while he's in prison in Rome. And they're powerful books. I mean, if you have struggles with spiritual, if you want to know more about spiritual warfare, the book of Ephesians is a great book. If you're dealing with really negative thinking and really what's my purpose, the book of Philippians is great. I mean, they're all great books. They're just powerful books that really can help us in really practical ways today.
When we were in Rome, we went to where Saint Peter was kept. I don't know if Saint Paul was in that same prison. If you spend 5 minutes there, in one of, and it just how anybody could, and the thing is, it's right in the main center. So I'm sure you can hear all the life happening outside that prison. But to be in that prison and to be able to write what they wrote is just, and to have it hold hold true for thousands of years and be
Right.
applicable is just extraordinary. And it was being in those prisons, looking at it, it just blows my mind what they went through for the faith and how they did it, and how they kept
Hmm.
their sanity in that environment.
Hmm.
And they're, a lot of what they were writing was so encouraging in
Right.
such a dismal place. I thought it was just fascinating.
And I think just to highlight what you're sharing with our listeners too, Bob, is that, and I think they would argue this too, and obviously they share this in the Bible as well, is that His grace is enough, that the grace of Christ, the grace of God, is what got them through that, because they knew without a shadow of a doubt the belief in a resurrected God named Jesus
Yeah,
Christ. They had that was not a so for them they knew how the story would end. And I think the longer that we've kind of gotten away from that, the more generations that have passed since that, the
yeah,
more we've kind of forgotten all that. But these people, yes, they wrote during extraordinarily difficult times. They would suffer horrific deaths. I mean, unbelievable deaths. Um, that and yet in that all and everything that they experienced, they remained true to who they are. And I would argue it's because they knew without a shadow of a doubt that what they were believing was 100% true.
yeah,
They have doubts about things, yes. So they struggle with stuff. I mean, even St. Paul says at times that when I was going through this difficulty, I worried to the point of almost death. Like he was at such a negative, dark place in his own life. But at the end, they talked about that, but then they would come back and say, "But I know that that my
yeah,
faith." They allowed their faith to speak much greater than whatever the circumstances they were in.
yeah. So for the Christmas season, you put together 3 thoughts of how to live through the Christmas season, to keep Christ in the Christmas season. I thought the first one was great. If you can do it, and there's 2 others beyond this, but put on Christ every day by staying in His peace. And then I think you also mentioned Joseph and Mary, the story of Joseph and Mary. But how do you stay in Christ's peace?
So one of the things that's so important for everyone to know is that choices matter. We hear that phrase so often. So I oftentimes say choices lead, feelings follow. In other words, every day you've got to make a choice about how and what kind of Christian you wish to be. Um, because if you simply wait till when your feelings are impacted, in other words, I'm dealing with some struggle, I'm dealing with an uneasy situation, to begin to begin thinking about how I want to be, how I want to be as a Christian, then you're allowing your feelings to lead you, not your faith. So one of the things I tell people all the time is that in order for us to truly have peace, we have to connect to the author of peace. The prophet Isaiah says in one of the most powerful Christmas prophecies, he says, "Behold, a virgin will give birth, and he's wonderful. He's a counselor, and he is the Prince of Peace." And I love that the Hebrew way of saying Prince of Peace is 3 words in the English, but it's 2 words in the Hebrew. It's Sar Shalom, and it basically means Sar means the one who's in charge. We use the word prince, but the one who's in charge of our peace. In other words, Christ is the one that's in charge of that. But if we don't give him that authority over our life, then he doesn't have that authority in our life.
Right,
We
right.
basically have to give that over to him. And so the challenges that you and I face is remembering that is every day being intentional with our choices about how we include Christ in our life. So obviously the things that we talk about are about being active in a house of God, being active in a church. We would say the Orthodox Church would be a great place to start with, but wherever you may be, whatever church you may be, but be active in that church, a church that ultimately anchors you and challenges you in ways to grow in your walk of faith. If you're simply going to a performance every Sunday, then I would say that's not the intent of church. So number one is being active in a house of God. Number two is being active in your prayer worship, even outside of the church. So that every day I'm spending time saying, God, I need to put everything in your hands. I love how in the Lord's Prayer it says, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And then this beautiful phrase, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." In other words, God's desire, Bob, for all of us is that the same what he is seeing in heaven, he would see on earth. That
Yeah.
that God's desire, His will, is whatever's being done in heaven should be done on earth. Now it looks starkly different than that. We understand that. So, but in heaven, everyone's worshiping Christ. Everyone's putting Him first. They're singing. They're praising Him. So, in addition to being in the house of God and in prayer, is that I would also argue is being very active in reading your Bibles. I mean, I tell people, I was joking the other day with people, I was like, with our church, I said, we say this so often, but truly, like, whose birthday are we truly celebrating? I mean, it's getting farther and farther from Christ's birthday every single year. I mean, now we're talking about Santa's birthday, but we get all the gifts. I mean, so at what point are we going to say, hey, wait a minute, this is Christ's birthday, and what gift is He wanting from us? Like, what gift are we going to give back to Him? Because it's His birthday. Like, what would God say to you and to me? Hey, Nick, hey, Bob, I need this gift from you. I should say I need it because He doesn't need anything, but I would love to see this gift from you this year. What would it be for us? And I would challenge our listeners is like, what would God be saying? Hey, I know you've been talking about doing this for a long time in our relationship, but why not this year? Like, I really would like that gift this year.
That's a great one. That's
So,
great. That is a great, like almost even a New Year's resolution as well.
mhm.
Number 2 was remember His promises.
So the thing is that, oftentimes when we're going through difficulties and challenges in our life, Bob, the problems, we magnify them. We, as I was mentioning earlier, our problems occupy space in our mind. And so when we allow ourselves to remember the problems, then we can't remember His promises. So for 400 years, this is very powerful and important for our listeners today. From the last book of the Old Testament, which is called the book of Malachi, and I think we've talked about this in the past, but just as a reminder, it's the book of Malachi, to the very first book of the New Testament, which is the Gospel of Matthew. And there's some debate as to which book was there, but let's just, for the sake of just for this session, talk about this. There is close to 400, and some may even argue 500 years of absolute silence. Like, no one hears from God. There's no writings. There's no hearing from God that people write down. So there's a period of absolute silence. And there were problems there. I mean, there was obviously a great deal of problems there. That's the Romans would end up conquering during this time. Alexander the Great, during this time, there was a great deal of oppression that was taking place by the Romans, to some extent, the Greeks as well, for those for the Hebrew people. And in those difficulties that they were experiencing, I'm sure there were many people who may have left the faith because they were focused so much on their problems. But here Christ comes and He tells them, that when He comes in the middle of in the darkness of the world, and He says, through the angel, He says that I'm giving you great news and good tidings that the Savior, the Messiah that you have been waiting for, that has been quiet for 400 years, which obviously He's not been quiet for 400 years, but nothing's been written about it, is come, and He's come to save us. And He brings this message to the shepherds in the field who had tons of problems. They weren't even considered equal. Shepherds were considered to be low-class people. It's amazing how Christ uses the most unassuming, quote-unquote, low-class people to share His message with them. And I guess what I'm trying to share with all of our listeners today is that don't allow your problems to speak louder than God's promises. To make sure that every single day you remember that we worship a God who is a God who comes in the middle of the darkness of our own life. He comes in the mess of this world. I'm not too sure if many of our people realize this as well, Bob, is that it's interesting. I'm actually giving the final sermon in this sermon series this Sunday, and I'm talking a little bit about this, but Jesus Christ is born in a cave. It's interesting that caves back in those days were not meant to be like where people would go and have a child. He was born in a cave that would oftentimes have the sheep, stay in days and days in when it was too cold, when it was wet outside. So they would stay in these sheep, who were not clean animals, by the way, would stay there, and they would do everything that you could imagine inside that cave. So that cave was dirty. It's not the nice little manger scenes that we see oftentimes on Christmas in front of people's homes. This was a dirty, dirty place. And I think to myself how Christ chooses the most messy area, a cave that's filled with everything that you and I could imagine, to be born in that, and how Christ comes into the messiness of this world, to the problems of your life, to the darkness that you're going through. And he's saying, hey, listen, don't forget the promises that I made. I'm coming, that if you believe in me, that yes, you'll experience dark days. But stand your ground, stand in faith, because I've already overcome all this. Like his promises of what he's going to do for us and what he does for us. And again, I'm not trying to make this a very pep rally type message. This is not, I'm just simply telling you, like, don't forget the promise, because the problems, if you allow them, if you feed them, they're going to grow, will speak louder than the promises of Christ. And that's the thing that I want to encourage the laity not to let that
Didn't
happen.
you also tie in to the in Genesis, the beginning, the darkness theme at the beginning of it?
Yeah, I mean, right.
You know what I'm
I love
referring
that.
to?
I mean, it's what I was highlighting in the sermon was that in almost every event where in Christ's life, whenever he tends to do things in the darkest of times. So the very first words by God, and you should Google this on your own, friends, in the Old Testament that's recorded again, is let there be light, because darkness had been over the land. The very first event that we see Christ is born, that happens in the New Testament, is we see how the shepherds are out in the field, and it says, behold, a great light. How did that light be so great? Because it was dark. They were out in the field. It was dark. We hear about when Christ is on the cross, and it says that at the moment of his crucifixion, that darkness came over all the land. And then we hear about that early in the morning was the good news that came to the myrrh-bearing women, that he is alive. What's my point is that Christ uses the darkness to show his greatest light. Light, his light, will always trump any of our darkest seasons. So if you're hearing us studying, you're going, I'm in a really dark time in my life, whatever it is, I just want you to know that stay in faith, and remember God's promises, that God never promised that you would not face difficulty, but having him with you in that will give you the strength to get you through that. And part of our faith is remembering that, as I mentioned earlier, faith is remembering that it's not the absence of any fear, because yes, you're going to have fear, but it's having the presence of Christ in that fear. It's knowing that, hey, God, I know you're going to get me through that. So remember that, because that oftentimes is what we oftentimes forget when we're going through those difficult times.
And obviously, most or whomever's Greek or Orthodox out there, there's that moment before the light comes out at Easter.
Exactly.
And even as a kid, man, when now because of city ordinances, whatever, they've got a few lights here and there. But when I was a kid, it went pitch black, and it just made the hair on the back of your neck, because when that light came out, as a kid, I didn't. You don't really know, you don't grasp what's going on, but man, that's it. And now as an adult, I mean, I'm crying when it happens, because you realize just the enormity of that moment.
Absolutely.
And then number three was, remember that I thought was such a wonderful point that you made. So I was thinking in dance class, and we were going to make the first movie where I had to dance a lot in it. And I remember the choreographer was a friend, and we finished class and we go outside and we're standing in the hallway. He goes, okay, just show me what we learned. And I did it, and he just looked at me and he went, it's a process, Bob. And I remember thinking, what does that mean? What do you mean it's a process? But in my heart, I think I knew what it meant, which is, it all takes time. It takes a process. You don't be, my path on spiritual life is a combination of many things: prayer, real life circumstances, things that happened in my life where prayer was involved, people mentors that came involved. It's a process of all that stuff that builds your spiritual life. I think that's what you meant. Am I on the right path?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing for all of us is to remember that, I in this sermon I was using this, and I think it may be helpful to kind of share this with all of you as well. Is I think about like how Christ was, his earthly father was Joseph, and we know that Joseph was a carpenter, and we recognize that in that fact that he was a carpenter, he would get pieces of wood and he would have to shape and mold those pieces of wood in order to create whatever it was that they were wanting to design. And I think in the same way that when we find things that are happening to us, when we find ourselves going through stuff, I think it's so important that to not focus on what's happening to us, but rather to focus on what is God working on the inside of us. Like focus on what is happening in you and not to you. And one of the things I've oftentimes, just on my own personal life, is I oftentimes will say, when I'm going through a difficulty, a challenge, sometimes larger and sometimes smaller issues, but I'll simply say, God, what are you trying to teach me in this? What do I need to learn? What are you trying to tell me in this? Because the Bible talks about that in these struggles that we're facing, God is teaching us. He's molding us. He's creating in us a character trait or a part of us that we need to have more of. Maybe that's, hey, God, I need to be depending more on you and less on me. Maybe it's that I need to be more patient. Maybe that I need to just not speak up about things so much. But whatever it is, I'm looking for ways to make sure that He is doing the work in me. So I'm not going to focus so much on what's happening to me, but what's happening in me. And God, what are you trying to teach me in this?
Yeah. Let me ask you just a theoretical question, and it's a visual question.
Mhm.
If you can visualize your spiritual life as a plane, and Christ is the pilot, are we even in that cockpit, or are we back in the passenger seat? Are we a co-pilot?
I've heard that so often, and I just don't. Yeah, I mean, God doesn't need a co-pilot. I mean, I think
That's
that,
what I figure. I figure he's got,
yeah, He doesn't need us to be co-pilot, but He needs us to be on the plane. I would say that, yeah. I think He's going to want us to. He's going to want us to freely choose to be a passenger on that plane. And when you're on that plane, there's no guarantees. You're going to find turbulence at times, but you know that you have the right pilot. And I hate limiting God to a pilot, a word that we
Right.
have, but that we make sure that we know that He is the one who's, that He's the one that's leading us. He's the one that's guiding us.
The
We just
nave
simply
of
have to
the church. How's that? Is that better? The nave of the church?
yes, yeah,
Get an
yes.
A. Get
Yes.
an
I
A.
mean, it's just, we try to sometimes minimize, and I appreciate this. We try to minimize Christ to kind of fit into our, what He is in our life. Like, sometimes people say, well, God is my friend. And I'm like thinking, no, um, God loves us. And the Bible talks about His friendship. And again, we're translating Greek words into the best English translation of it. Um, God, yes, in a very filial way, He loves us so much. Um, but let's not get us mixed up. I mean, there is God, and then you know, and there's
Yeah.
us. I mean, we are His creation, and He has breathed His life in us, and He desires for us to just look more and more like Him every single day of our life. That's why it's so powerful that we have icons in our church, is to constantly look at myself in comparison to who He is.
Yeah. We're going to wrap it up with a story, and then I got my bonus question of the day. I love the story. I'm switching sermons on you now, but I think
Yeah.
you'll remember the story of the war and Christmas Eve. By the way, I think there's a movie. Oh, I think it's called Midnight Clear, and it was
Mm.
made 2 decades ago. I believe that's what it was about. I can't swear to it, but when I heard it, I said, I think there was a movie made. Do you want to you know what I'm referring to, correct? The
Yeah,
story?
absolutely. Yeah.
You want to tell them what that's about?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that in this particular topic, we were talking about the importance of us um, showing mercy to people. And this is the story that Bob is referring to is called the Christmas Truce of 1914. We know that in July of 1914, World War I starts between the Allied powers and the Central Powers. And the United States and Russia and the other countries were on the Allied powers, and then the Central Powers were Germany, the Ottoman Empire, etc. But in that very first 6 months, from July to December, or 7 months, 6 months, I guess, in that December on Christmas Eve, I think one of the most remarkable events ever took place in warfare history that I think is so needed to be hearing right now. So back in those days, the phrase that you've heard called trench warfare, Bob, and that phrase actually was born through World War I, where basically people would create these little trenches, and they would hide in these trenches, and they would lob bombs across the other side to the other side without ever even seeing them, without ever even what they would shoot indiscriminately, just start killing the opposing side without ever talking to them, without ever seeing them. That's how they would approach. And 16 million people would die in World War I, leading up to World War II, which would be the war that more people lost, that we've seen so many people lose their lives to. What I shared, what was so extraordinary about this story is that we don't know who it was, we don't know which side it was the Allied powers or the Central Powers, but someone had the courage to get out of that trench and go into the common ground and begin to ask for a ceasefire. And the other side, which again, we don't know which one it was, whoever initiated this, but someone took the first step, came to that, and they started talking. They started seeing each other, and they started to put down their weapons and just talk. And that night, they not only exchanged Christmas wishes, because they were all the Germans were Christians, obviously the English and the Americans and the French were Christians as well, and they began to exchange gifts. They would end up singing Silent Night together that night, and then the following day, history records that the leaders of those sides were so angry and infuriated with these two groups meeting that they forced them to fight against each other, and they refused to do so. And then they ended up transferring them to other parts of the war. And the point I was trying to make to them is that in the middle of a war where people are lobbing bombs at people they're not even seeing, they're just killing, that some people, Christ spoke within them to leave their trenches and to get onto that common ground and to see people the way God sees them. And the challenge that we have in our world is that we're living in a world that's going to constantly tell me that I'm different than you, Bob, or that you're different than me, or that we're different than this person or this belief or this whatever. And I get that we're different. But there's unity even in diversity. And the key for all of us is to say, okay, let me see them the way God would want to see them. Like that family member that I don't want to see at Christmas time, that frustrates me every time. Let me see them the way God sees them. That political conversation that we're going to probably have at Christmas time, let me avoid that and simply just let me have a talk. Let me talk the way Christ would want me to talk. Let me listen the way Christ would want me to listen. Because it's so easy in a world that's telling me that you hurt me, oh, I'm going to hurt you. You lob a bomb at me, I'm going to lob 10 bombs at you. And we see it actually happening in the world right now. I mean, physically, but also amongst families. Sometimes some of the smallest things that can be keeping families from talking year after year after year, especially at the holidays. So my point would be is let God be the just. Let God take care of all of our justice. Let's just be His followers while we're on this earth, while He gives us time to celebrate another Christmas and to be the very best version of Christ to every single person we come into contact with.
I love what you say. It's great. It's a great way of thinking, especially when you meet that person, see them like God sees them. I think you mentioned that when we were talking about forgiveness as well. So, great one. Okay, bonus question. So I had heard, it may have been in one of your sermons, or I can't remember where, but it was so different than I had heard in any other church, that at your church, you usually in most, at least in all the Orthodox churches I've been in since forever, the church liturgy finishes, and then they pass out trays, they collect money, and then they do the sermon. But I heard that you don't pass out trays. Is that true?
Right. So let me just kind of preface by saying that every church is unique. I don't want anyone listening to this and going, "Hey, look, Father Nick's not passing trays, so let's not pass trays in our church." I mean, it really is. But what I have found, Bob, in the St. Paul says that the law is written on our hearts, and I think that what I mean by that is that at the end of the day, we know that our hearts, that we all know that we are called to make a difference in this world, to use our gifts to make a difference in this world. Not only our talents, our time, but in our treasure, this what we oftentimes hear, the three T's, and to give back to God, not what is a little bit of ours, but what is already His. We're simply giving Him back what is already His. And so what I oftentimes, and in our church, what we have done, we've been doing this for, I don't know, maybe probably 15 years at least, is we tell our community, listen, we're going to give almost 10% of your stewardship towards outreach ministries. I mean, this past week, over the last year, we've probably written checks of well over maybe 70, 80, $90,000 in stewardship program. I mean, in outreach ministries in the city of Jacksonville and obviously around the world. But I always tell the people, listen, your gift is not about lights and grass and cutting the grass and mowing and fixing the bushes. Your gift is a personal connection that you have with Christ. And when you give, I want you to pray about it first. Pray about what you feel God is calling you to give, not what you think you want to give, but what God is speaking through you to give. And He gives us a template. He says 10% of your salary should be given back to Him as a sign of our love, our trust, but ultimately also that we're not putting it in a penny bank. We're putting it towards making a difference in this world. In fact, people should know that Christ, if you were to categorize Christ's sermons, He speaks overwhelmingly about stewardship more than any other topic in the entire New Testament. Yes.
Huh.
So, in generosity, which comes through our stewardship. And so the key that for what I've shared, what I tell our church community is, listen, if you can only give $1, that's between you and God. That's not my business. I'm not involved with that. But one day we're going to stand before Christ, and you have to answer the question I oftentimes ask them: What if Christ asked you, what did you do with me? You want to be able to have a better question than, well, I only had $1, but I had $7 to go to Starbucks or whatever it was that, so we talk about, and we're very transparent with what we do with our outreach and how we try to use those funds to make a difference in this world. And so we don't pass trays. And what we have found, I'll be honest with you, overwhelmingly so, is that the less that we pass trays or even talk about that stuff and are more transparent with where their money is actually going, the more that we have received. And most churches, a lot of churches right now, to be honest with you, Bob, are moving away from the tray system because people tend to give only what they typically would give. And they just kind of fold, I love our people, but, you fold $1, 100 billion ways to go in, to do that. But when you say, hey, look, no pressure. This is between you and Christ. It's your gift to Him. I'm telling you what we're going to do with it, but we can only do as much as you give. That's as simple as that. And
you just started that practice just on your own, said one day, hey guys, let's try this. Is that how it happened?
I tried that because I had a very good friends of mine that were in a couple of other different denominational churches, and it's a brotherhood that we have that we kind of meet once a month with, and we talk, and they were trying it at the same time. I'm like, you know what, let me try it out on ours. But again, this was like 15 years ago. And we still do our talks on stewardship, and but not so much about give, but really why, like what is our purpose? Like I want what are we called to do? And it doesn't always have to be through your money. I mean, money helps. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we need to recognize that that's what helps a lot. But I mean, going back to what we were mentioning earlier, is how many people are bearing their talents? They're going to their graves, and Christ is saying, "What? I gave you this talent, and this talent, and you did it, and you just did it. You did it for a couple of years, and that was it. Or sometimes people will say to me, Father Nick, it's time for the sometimes the older people say this, it's time for the younger generation to start doing some work. And I'm like, well, we got to, it's not either or. We're all in this together. As long as we have breath, we have purpose. And that's, and so that's how we've kind of done it. And it's worked well. I mean, even in times when the economy was really, really difficult for people.
And for those of you who don't know, Father, I don't know how you have a huge church there, correct? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I always caution when people ask about the size of our church, because at the end of the day, every soul matters. And so we have a large church that's growing, yes, and and I think I think people are looking for a church that they can feel like that will challenge them, that is going to challenge them in ways that they may have not been challenged before, and has in a church that has a faith that's bigger than a priest. I mean, we're not. That's the one thing unique about the Orthodox Church, as you know, Bob. You've done so many videos on this. Is that it's not about me. It's about He. It's all about Christ. But yeah, it's a growing community. We have a large congregation, and I'm just trying to keep up. I'll be quite honest with you, trying to keep up with, trying to be the best example of of a priest, as in a shepherd to our congregation, and many times falling short of that, but trying to do the best I can, and remembering that we have a purpose. We have a purpose in this world.
You're doing a great job. I think I saw it on Facebook or Instagram, maybe it was. How many people in the last month or 2 months had joined the faith? And I think you had a picture of a group of them, and then there was another picture, and I went, usually I see that at Easter, but I'm like, wow. Am I right?
There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal that shared this, and I think we talked about this, but there is a true awakening into in the West towards the Orthodox Church. People for so many years thought that this was an ethnic church, whether it be Syrians, Greeks, Romanians, Russians, the Russian Orthodox Church, Romanian, Greek, whatever. But now what they're seeing, especially as the churches have become, that the language has become less and less of, and because now you have more and more generations of people that don't speak those languages or have a very limited knowledge of those languages, and more English is being introduced. Now it's and through social media and through online platforms like this, people are inquiring about the Orthodox Church, and so this Wall Street Journal was talking about this awakening in the West. So in the last week, actually the last 10 days, we've had 8 baptisms and 7 chrismations. That's just in the last 8 days. And our catechism class, which is where we people go through catechism, and these people have been in catechism, some of which came at Easter of last year. So they have been through an extensive catechism process every single week throughout the summer. We don't take any breaks, constant reading, and excuse me. And by the way, we don't take breaks for any of our ministries during the week. Just some of our ministries, during the summer, we may take a day or a Sunday or a week off here or there. But as far as all of our ministries tend to run throughout the year. Beautiful. But with that being said, we've had quite a bit, and we have another full class that will be chrismated closer to Pascha, closer to Easter.
Wow. And we're going to get all this stuff in a second, but just for those of you that know, the Orthodox faith is you have to go through a process to get into the faith. You just can't go up and take communion that day. Am I saying that correctly, Father?
Right, because you're talking about a church, and very few, and we're trying to be as unbiased as possible, but I always encourage everyone to just do your own research. Stop letting someone tell you about a specific belief or whatever, and when you just simply research unbiasedly church history, the way the early Christians worshipped. If you're wanting to get back to those levels of a root system of that, everything wasn't centered around the glitz, the glamour, the lights, the camera, the band, which is all beautiful things. We're not making any judgments about that. But if you're trying to get back to the authentic way of worshiping, then I would encourage you study the Orthodox Church, unbiased. There's no one's going to hold you to it. There's no pressure to it. But research the Orthodox Church, because a lot of people are coming into this church because they have simply researched it and going, oh my gosh, this is the church this is the way that Christ himself worshiped. This is how the disciples, like the St. Paul, the St. Peter's, how they worshiped. Well, I want to get back to that. Let me at least study that so I know what it is. And there's been an awakening because for a long time, the Orthodox Church has been a mystery to a lot of people, and they haven't really been aware of it. Now that they're getting more aware of it, or they simply can group us with the Catholic Church, which is not accurate as well. So anyway, those are the things that I would encourage.
There's a saying that when I was doing the Saints tapes, we would always talk about this. There's a saying in the Orthodox faith that we have the fullness of the faith, but I think we've always, not always, but since I've been in the faith, we haven't done the best job of presenting it or going out there and evangelizing. And I think that we're getting better at it. Speaking of which, so tell them, Father, how they can hear your sermons, how they can get a hold of you if they want you and Presbyter Roxanne to come and speak. all of the above, if you can let them know. And I think I've got one, but I think there's more than just this, correct? Am I right? Or is that a good start?
Yeah. So and one of the things I would want to share with you, Bob, and to your lovely wife and your beautiful family is, first of all, happy birthday to the boys tomorrow.
Thank you.
But Merry Christmas to you, brother. I love you, and I love your wife so much. You guys are, I mean, such a blessing to everyone that comes into contact with you and what you're doing with your platform.
Oh, thank
It's a blessing to know you, and I mean that from the depths of my heart. And I know that all of your audience that listens to you feels the same way.
you.
I would encourage you, if you're looking for those of you listening that would like to listen to our sermons, you can find them. All of our sermons are archived on our Lowe's YouTube channel, and it's simply the Lowe's. So just go to LOUHS is our YouTube channel. It's got all of our sermons are all archived. You can also subscribe on our website to our daily Facebook, daily inspirational messages that we send out every single day at 7 a.m. Eastern time into your email inbox. We do a live radio show ourselves on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and you can find it you can find the archives of them on our YouTube channel. And if you're interested in having us come and speak to your church or to an organization, we'd be honored to do so. You can find out more about doing that on our website, thelowes.com.
And thank you all that wrote comments. I'm just looking at them here. Rita, James, Demi. By the way, Demi wrote us the name of that movie. I remember it was called Silent Night, and it was in 2005, starring Linda Hamilton. Is that the one? I've got to still see if that's the one. 2005 was. I'll find out. But there was a movie out there. I can't remember the director's name, but there was a movie, and I remember he became somewhat well known because of the movie. And I think that's what it was. But anyway, Father, tell Presbytera, I say Merry Christmas to you, to your family, to your whole congregation, and especially to you. It's been an absolute joy doing all of these and getting to know you and also more aspects of our faith better. It's been fantastic. And your sermons, if any of you just go up there and listen to them, they are just so wonderful to hear, to listen to, and to grow in the faith. So God bless you, brother. Have a happy New Year.
Thank you, brother.
And we'll talk soon. God bless you. And thank all of you. Merry Christmas to all of you and Happy New Year to all of you as well.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Thank you.
God bless.